So the trade unions have gotten very aggressive about helping or trying to weed out people who might have a substance use problem prior to having them enter their trade, because they recognize the deleterious effects of those folks on the health and welfare fund's financial situation. The numbers, this next slide talks about the more numbers, but again, the critical factor here is the numbers have been stable. For the last 10 or so years, the number of people using illicit drugs, except for the prescribed medications that are being used illegally, the numbers have been relatively stable and have not gone up dramatically. Now, what I do find interesting is the baby boomers. Is this the baby boomer slide? Yeah, this is the baby boomers. And for the baby boomers, the numbers are hysterical, because if you look at the bottom two bullet points, for those in the 50 to 54 age bracket, the past month use of an illicit drug has gone from 3.4% of that group to 6.7% of that group. And for those in the 54 to 59 year age bracket, that number has trebled, right? It's trebled. So as, it's kind of the pig and the python. As those people who grew up in the 70s have gotten older, their pattern of drug use has gotten older with them, and those people continue to do what they've done for many years, and now they're just getting older and still doing those kinds of things. This is something I used to deal with quite often when I first started working in this field in about 1993, is the fact that a lot of folks thought when they talked about drug addiction and alcoholism, this was a problem of unemployed poor people, people in minority communities, and that couldn't be further from the truth, although many people still believe that. They still believe this is a minority problem that occurs in inner cities. So when you look at illicit drug use, you can see that it's not the minority people in inner city communities who are doing it, it's people who work. I'm sorry? Go ahead.
No questions.
Okay. Of the 19 million people who reported past month use, 65%, 66% are employed. So it just kind of reinforces the point that most people are employed. As Kathy mentioned, the biggest drug problem we have in this country, the biggest drug problem we continue to have in this country is alcohol misuse. Alcohol is our nation's biggest drug problem. It takes all the other drugs combined and it wipes them out because it's it causes so many problems. It is regrettably something that we don't deal with very effectively. And I can tell you, I used to work for a liquor distributor, and they would have me in a couple times a year to do drug and alcohol awareness training in their workplace. And it was a day when they'd bring all of their staff in for training, and all of the liquor they sold, all of the hard liquor, the wines, the beers they sell would be stacked up in displays behind me as I talked about the evils of drugs. Don't talk about alcohol. You can talk about marijuana, you can talk about cocaine, but you can't talk about drugs, and that was their policy. And it was such a paradox that, every now and then, just for effect, I turn around and look at all the booze as I was talking about the evils of drug use or misuse. Again, I just here is just the fact that when we talk about binge drinking, this is a huge problem for young adults, people in the 18 to 25 year age bracket. Every single year, this time of year and then in spring, you will hear stories about high school kids who got drunk and died from alcohol overdoses. Some of you may have heard the story from the University of Tennessee last week, where I believe a young man was hospitalized after alcohol poisoning, but he didn't drink the alcohol. And they actually gave it to him in the other side. And so, it's one of those fraternity initiation things where their behavior with alcohol is just bizarre and crazy. But it's tolerated, it's joked about, it's more humorous than it is serious. Young adults, this is a huge problem for the binge drinking, because this is where kids get drunk, they get themselves into trouble. They have problems at your sororities and your fraternities, and in high schools at proms, where you see so much heartache. Again, when we come to talk about alcohol misuse, most people who have an alcohol-related problem who are binge drinkers are people who work. 75% of binge drinkers are people who work. Now, one of the other companies I own is a company called ScreenSafe, and ScreenSafe runs drug testing programs in labor unions. And it works with labor unions throughout the country. But The trade unions in the metropolitan Chicago area have the most aggressive drug testing program of any employer in the Chicagoland area. So more aggressive than hospitals, more aggressive than pretty much any organization, except those, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission and some of the DOT regulated entities. So if I'm an electrician in the city of Chicago, every 2 years I will be selected for a drug test on an unscheduled basis. Concurrently, I am in a random sample at 10%. So every single 2-year period, I'm going to be tested at least once and probably or possibly more often than that. Okay? So that's the electricians, the sheet metal, almost all the trades in the Chicagoland area participate in this relatively aggressive drug-free workplace policy program, and it's something they agree on with their contractors association. For the first 9 months of this year, 10,800 people have been tested for the trades. They're positive. The number of people who have tested positive was 76. 19 people refused to take the test, which is a self-evident situation. Frequently people submit substituted samples, so they submit, if you buy High Times magazine, there are generally about 40 different advertisements for freeze-dried urine, urine, from different kinds of animals that you can buy. There are kits that you can buy to help you make sure the urine's at the right temperature when you provide it as your donation. So somebody submitted a substituted sample, and then 6 results were canceled by the medical review officer, which means that something about that sample made it suspicious, was not compliant. So it was, someone might have put toilet water in, someone might have, if someone goes into the bathroom and scoops the water out of the toilet, the water's blue generally, and unless there's Smurf, there's no good reason for that water having been blue. The most important thing is when, as an example, the electricians started this program 12 years ago, their positive rate was 7%. Their positive rate now is 0.94%, so it's less than 1%. Every trade, the roofers just started their program. Now, if you work with trades in Chicago, you know the roofers is a pretty tough group of folks. Their positive rate is dropping from a 3, 4, 5% rate down to less than 1 or 2%. So as the program is rolled out, as it's been initiated, people have been sent to treatment, people have been sent to education, the positive rates are dropping, and we're having an impact. In the same program, 576 people have been sent for a random hair test. Several of the local unions do hair testing, and of the people who have been sent for a hair test, there were 18 positives. One person refused to take the test, so their positive rate was 3.3%. And you'll see that with the hair testing levels, the positive rates are much higher. 889 people were sent for follow-up or accelerated tests. These are people who have tested positive in the past or previously. And of the 889 people who were sent for a follow-up test, 18 people tested positive, 7 people refused to take the test, 3 people tested late, which constitutes a positive, 6 people failed to comply with the assistance program, the helping program, and then 1 result was canceled by the medical review office. So for people who had previously been positive, who were in an accelerated or follow-up testing program, 4% of them continued to test positive on an ongoing basis. So the good news is 96% were doing okay, 4% were continuing to test positive. For-cause tests, the number of for-cause tests is very low. If I'm an electrician, as an example, today I could be working at McCormick Place as a supervisor. Tomorrow I could be working at McCormick Place as an electrician using the tools. So it's discouraged by the nature of the way the work is organized for you to send someone for a for-cause test, because that person could retaliate against you very quickly in a different work environment. So the positive rate for alcohol tests has been 25%. The positive rate for drug tests has been 20%. Now, if you look at the Quest Diagnostic Laboratories results, one of the things you'll see is their positive rates for people who are sent for for-cause tests are in the 90% area. What that means to me is people are waiting too long to send someone for a test, and they're only sending people for a test when there's no way around the fact that they have a problem. Okay? Finally, the last thing I want to point out is the difference between hair testing and urine testing for apprentices. For apprentices who were sent for hair tests, the positive rate was 2.2%. The apprentices that were sent for urine tests, it was 2.2%. For hair tests, it was 5.6%. So nearly 3 times the number of people were winnowed out by saying, we're going to test for hair, because hair testing provides a 30-day window into your drug use habit. whereas urine testing provides a 1 to 3 day window into your drug use pattern. Okay? Despite all the efforts into helping people deal with drug and alcohol problems, I just pulled out a couple of examples. In Tucson, Arizona, a young officer who was 24, 25 years old called the station on her way to work and said, "I have a problem. I'm scared about driving to work." They went to they told her to pull over, and they tested her, and her blood alcohol level, I believe, was 0.23. So this young police officer was driving to work that morning with a blood alcohol level 3 times the level that was permissible. Indiana, the next slide. Indiana's had a lot of drug and alcohol problems. This was just a dispatcher who showed up to work with a 0.23 blood alcohol level.
It's on Tucson.
Oh, I'm sorry. This is the dispatcher who showed up to work. I'm sorry, his blood alcohol level was 0.06 when he showed up at work at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. He claimed he hadn't had a drink since the previous night at 3 a.m. But there was a state trooper in Indiana that hit 4 motorcyclists. He was drunk when he was tested. I mean, the number of incidents in Indiana was kind of surprising. In Concord, New Hampshire, a physician showed up to work and his blood alcohol level was 0.18 when he showed up. So all the things we're doing to talk about creating drug-free workplace programs, creating incentives for people to deal with this problem, none of it matters. A police officer in Maine, and there were a couple of police officers in Maine, state troopers who had DUIs in the first 6 months of this year. What that suggests to me over and over again, another one on the first day of school across the country, the number of people who showed up, the number of teachers who showed up to work drunk on the first day of school was astounding to me. And maybe you don't like kids so much, so that's how you deal with that. I'm not sure. And then the number of pilots who show up and have been drinking. I was astounded to find out during the first 9 months of this year, 83 flight crew members from Indian Airlines had to be removed from service for showing up to work drunk or inebriated. And so, it's just one more example. I was going to do a couple case studies. I don't have the time to do that, but I just want to point out that in the workplace you have the opportunity to create a culture that says we don't tolerate this. The problem in most workplaces over and over again is people come to work with a problem, behaving badly, performing poorly, and their bosses fail to deal with that problem successfully. They ignore it, they tolerate it, they don't deal with it, and as a consequence you have people who show up for work for years, a little bit drunk, having a problem, and the supervisor. So to create a comprehensive or a successful drug-free workplace program, you have to have a good policy. You have to educate your employees about your policy. You need to train your supervisors, then you need to train your supervisors, then you need to train your supervisors again, because those are the people who will make a program work or fail. And then obviously, because I fundamentally believe this, you have to give people an opportunity to get help when they recognize themselves or outside influences force them to deal with their problem. You have to give them the resources to get the help that they need. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The benefit of going last is I can think about the things that people have said before and emphasize a couple of comments, and I feel like I want to do that before I jump into the criminal justice system discussion. One of the things that I think emerged both out of what Kathy has said and what Bill has said is that there's a difference between substance misuse and addiction or chemical dependency. And I think it's really important to understand those differences. Substance use in general starts out as a choice. Somebody makes a choice to drink or use a drug. And for the vast majority of folks, that use remains under their control and they can quit. They can quit anytime, and practices like drug testing and workplace educational programs, school educational programs, enable people to learn more about substance misuse and its impact on lives, on family, on communities, etc., and so they stop using. But for a small percentage of folks, that use turns into a disease, an illness that fundamentally changes the brain, and the individual's self-control over that is no longer effective. And it's really important to understand that it isn't a moral problem, it isn't bad behavior. It goes to a compulsive disorder in spite of continued negative consequences of all kinds. Loss of family, criminal justice system involvement, loss of employment, loss of income, all kinds of things. Some folks will continue to use until they seek help. of some kind or another. Help from treatment programs, help from self-help groups, et cetera. But generally speaking, without treatment, they're not likely to stop using. And it's really important to understand that for a small select group of folks, that's the issue that we're facing. So my job today is to talk to you a little bit about substance use and abuse and its impact in the criminal justice system, and their kind of interrelatedness. If you pay any attention, every once in a while you'll see some statistics about the rate of substance use in the criminal justice system, and you'll see a national survey report that shows across the country people who've been arrested for any crime are tested for drugs. It's a part of a research project called ADAM, Arrestee Drug Abuse Monitoring Study, okay? And the range of positive drug tests for those individuals can be anywhere from around 40% up to 85% positive of arrestees coming to the justice system. And that's a very broad group of people. In Chicago, the number tends to be pretty high. We tend to tip pretty high on the percentage of folks in contrast to other areas around the country. So 75% of our folks, 80% of our folks test positive for drug use at the time of arrest. That arrest usually happens, and that test usually happens within about 24 hours of the time the person comes in contact with the police, okay? So you can assume that at least at the point of arrest, if not the point of crime, many of those folks have been using drugs. That's not even alcohol, okay? That's illicit drugs. The United States has had a very complicated relationship with drug use and abuse over many generations. One of our major strategies for dealing with it is to arrest and incarcerate people. And so while there is some education and workplace focus and there's some prevention efforts that go on, we have treated drug addiction, drug use, drug addiction as a crime. And there's been a lot of conversation about changing the balance of that conversation. And I'll get to some of the efforts that have been put in place in order to do that. But I want to give you, I do want to give you some statistics. I want you to grasp the significance of this because treating addiction as a crime is something that will frankly follow that person for the rest of their lives. They will have criminal convictions, prison stays, etc. for the rest of their life. And I know that many people think that, and the general public thinks, that if a person does the crime and does their time, they've paid their debt to society and they're free to go. They can go back and get a job, they're able to get housing, they're able to go back to school. Such is not the case. In fact, those criminal convictions now are available online and are routinely dug up years after a person has had a conviction, years after they've been in recovery, years after they've really turned their lives around. And so the consequences of treating addiction as a crime last far beyond any particular incident that may occur in someone's life. So just to give you some stunning, I think, statistics, the United States has the highest rate of incarceration in the world and the highest number of people incarcerated in the world. We incarcerate more people than China. We incarcerate more people than Russia, okay? I mean, these are countries that we tend to think of as relatively oppressive, and yet we arrest and incarcerate more people than any of them. We incarcerate 1 in 100 people. So I don't know how many, if there are 30 of us, 30 people in this room, if we triple the number of people in here, one of those folks is going to end up in prison, okay? It's just that simple. Many people cycle through the jail and prison system repeatedly. Some of that is due to their behavior, some of that is due to the lingering consequences of criminal convictions. 11.8 million people are admitted to local jails annually, 11.8 million, 12 million people. That's the population of the state of Illinois entering the jail systems annually. 700,000 people are admitted to prison released from prison annually. 68% of the people released are rearrested within 3 years of their release from prison. So prison itself is not serving as a deterrent, right? If people are being rearrested and reincarcerated within 3 years, that is not a strategy that is perhaps accomplishing what the intended purpose of the incarceration was. And it's probably not surprising to you that African Americans and Hispanics are disproportionately arrested and incarcerated with comparison to whites, even though rates of substance use disorders are relatively even across those racial and ethnic groups. So if you look at men aged 18 and older, so we're talking adult males, 1 in 15 African Americans will be incarcerated, 1 in 36 Hispanics, and 1 in 106 whites. Among women, the trend and the pattern is the same, but the numbers are lower. So it's 1 in 100 African American women, 1 in almost 300 Hispanics, and 1 in 355 whites are incarcerated. In Illinois specifically, the numbers look a little bit more like this. African Americans are 9 times more likely to be in prison than whites. It's the 14th worst in the country with regard to disproportionality and disparities, and 5.6 times more likely than the national average for rates of incarceration. People in jail have very high rates of diagnosable substance use disorders, okay? Use in spite of negative consequences. And the rates are 45 to 53% of prison inmates have diagnosable substance use disorders, and about 85% of jail arrestees are substance involved. They may not have a diagnosable addiction disorder, but they're misusing substances. I get the latest number for Chicago is that 81% of male arrestees tested positive. That's the latest in Chicago. Now you may occur to you that if about half or more of the people going through prison have a substance use disorder, that they would actually get treatment while they were there. You would be wrong. They do not. A very small percentage, less than 10%, who need treatment actually get it. So 90% of the folks who need treatment come out not having had a treatment experience, not being introduced to treatment and sobriety, really, as an alternative to the lifestyles that they've been leading. In Illinois, the number is 11%. So that's what happens in Illinois. There are things that are being done, that are put in place here in Illinois to address these issues, treatment and diversion options that may get us to our goal. When we incarcerate people, we think we're making society safer. The evidence suggests that's not true. The evidence suggests that those folks reoffend, right? So that implies that we're not really safer. The evidence supporting the efficacy of treatment is very strong. The efficacy of supporting mandated or coerced treatment is even stronger. The value of probation sentences and alternatives to incarceration is that a criminal justice sentence will keep people in a treatment program, such as Gateway Foundation, long enough for Gateway to really increase the person's motivation and awareness of the need for treatment, and then the person's commitment to recovery and commitment to doing the work that is involved in maintaining a sober and healthy lifestyle can happen. But you have to keep people in services long enough for that to really start to stick and make an impact. And so using the leverage of the courts is a great way to do that. So there are some programs that do that. TASC, the organization I work for, has been doing that for 35 years. And the rates of retention when folks are sentenced to TASC is double the normal rate of retention and treatment when folks are sent just by probation or whatever. And so, and our value then is in keeping them in long enough for treatment programs like Gateway, like HRDI. There are many, many programs in the city and in the state that address this population. There are diversion options. So there's, for first offenders who come through the criminal justice system, there's opportunities to be diverted, not sentenced, if they successfully complete a drug education program. And the success rate there is phenomenal. It's 85 or 90% of the folks who finish that program never get rearrested for a drug crime. It's phenomenal. So, but not enough people take advantage of it because they don't know about it. And so one of the things that I think is great about this program is that you guys can spread the word about things that work. I got you. I saw it. I can hear the paper rattling. Thank you. There are specialty courts. Many of you have probably heard about drug courts or mental health courts. Those are similar kinds of team approaches to dealing with the problems of addiction in the criminal justice system, bringing all kinds of supports, not just treatment, not just TASC or probation, but education, employment, housing, because people who have addictive disorders tend to fall through the cracks of those service delivery systems too. I'll stop and let Michael take over from here.
Thank you very much.